By show of hands, who here is convinced, absolutely convinced, that the Cubs will win the World Series? It's a better response than last night at 4 p.m., and especially this morning at 8 o'clock. But you can understand whether or not or why you would be convinced that the Cubs would win the World Series. I mean, look at how good they've been this year. They've trampled upon everyone else throughout the whole postseason. They had the most amount of wins during the regular season in all of baseball. They had really good team batting average, great pitching throughout the year. And so it's hard to not be convinced that they would end up romping the Indians coming up. When we're convinced about something, instead of just hoping about something, we firmly believe it. If you're convinced in your heart about something, then you firmly believe it. It's not just simply hoping, oh, I hope this happens, but being convinced about it. And Jesus today in the gospel presents a parable that goes straight against those who are convinced of their own righteousness. Those who have convinced themselves, who truly believe that they are righteous based on the things that they do. And we call that group the Pharisees here. So Jesus gives us this image of two people going to the temple area to pray. One's a Pharisee, another is a tax collector. We all know this story very well. But when you look a little more closely, you can see where Jesus is going with this. His first guy, imagine them up here in the sanctuary, the first one, a Pharisee. Standing here, a guy who goes to the temple a lot, probably a few times a week. He fasts twice a week, probably very vigorously. He gives 10% of his income to the temple. He follows the Jewish law. He's doing everything he's supposed to do. Sounds like a pretty righteous guy, doesn't it? On the other hand, you have the tax collector, who probably never comes to the temple area to pray. These guys were the scum of the earth, because they were sent out by the empire to collect taxes from the people. And there wasn't a whole lot of oversight back in those days, let's be honest. So what they would do is they would put the prices really high. They'd say, you make this much, okay, you owe this amount. Nobody was there to really correct them. And so they would charge a lot and keep all the extra for themselves that they didn't have to turn in. These guys were hated. And this guy was not a religious man, unlike the Pharisee. You probably never would have seen him in the temple. But something brought this tax collector to the temple. Some experience with the Lord. So let's look at what they say here, because it's very interesting what their prayers to the Lord look like. It says the Pharisee says this prayer to himself. Oh God, I thank you that I'm not like the rest of humanity. That I'm not like all these people, and especially not like this tax collector here. I fast twice a week. I give 10% of my income to the temple. I'm a pretty good guy, right? He's basically saying, you're welcome, Lord. But what is the prayer of the tax collector? He's saying, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And so, which one of these is justified? Which one of these is considered righteous? That's the question that Jesus has. And we all say, okay, it's the tax collector, because it's Jesus speaking, right? The tax collector is not the one who's righteous simply because he's not judging other people. You look at the Pharisee, he's judging everyone, but that's not the reason he's not righteous. The reason he is not righteous is because it's all about him. It says, he says the prayer to himself. He simply says to the Lord, thank you that I'm not like these people. And look at all these things that I've been doing for you. I've been following all these rules, all these different things. I've been just checking them off my list. But the tax collector isn't like that. He simply says, Lord, have mercy on me. I am a sinner. So in a sense, it's like the Pharisee has convinced himself of his own righteousness. When we're convinced about something, we truly believe it in our hearts. He's convinced himself of this. Whereas the tax collector has not convinced himself of his own righteousness or his own worthlessness. He has been convinced by God of the greatness of the Lord and of the mercy of God. I think it's very easy for us to fall into the mindset of the Pharisee, and not so much that we become judgy of everyone. I'm not saying that. None of us is that prideful. But in the sense that we often look at our faith life as simply a list that we check off the boxes, like the Pharisee. We say, okay, I went to Mass, check. I did my prayers for the day, okay, check that one off. I gave some money to the poor, I'll check that one off. It simply becomes a checklist. But where is God in the midst of that? It's all about us when we simply check off the boxes. And Jesus says, those aren't the things that make you a righteous person. We don't make ourselves righteous by the things we do. It is God Himself who makes us righteous by His mercy and His love. We heard in our responsorial psalm, the Lord hears the cry of the poor. He doesn't hear the prayer of those who are focused on themselves, like the Pharisee. The Lord didn't hear that prayer because the Pharisee wasn't even speaking it to the Lord. He was just speaking it to himself. He hears the cry of the poor. We hear in the book of Sirach from this first reading, the prayer of one who is lowly pierces the clouds, and it doesn't stop until it reaches its goal. It is the prayer of the lowly one, the prayer of the poor, that reaches God. And why is that? God doesn't hear the lowly, the poor, because they're poor. He hears the poor because they truly believe, they are convinced that they need the love of God in their hearts. Those who are like the Pharisees are not truly convinced that they need the love of God. And so that is the challenge that the Lord is presenting us today. He's saying, don't focus on all the things that we've done or the things we haven't done, but rather focus on what God has done for us. He's saying, let's not try to make ourselves righteous and not convince ourselves that we are good, but rather be convinced by God that He deeply loves us and is a merciful Father. Amen.